Well, we trust all this has been profitable. We have one more week after tonight, so next Monday night will be it. We may have just a few minutes to kind of give a summary as we come to the end next week, just to what have we learned or what are the lessons to take away from church history. I think the one that we'll see tonight is how God can use a variety of men. We're not all the same. They're not cut out of the same cloth. I mean, I've enjoyed doing the research and study on Billy Sunday. That's what this table's all about. We'll try to stop early again tonight so you get a chance to see some of the things I'm going to talk about. But, I mean, he was a unique man for a unique time. There's no question about that. And probably most of us would not be used to his style of preaching if we would have had the opportunity to even hear him preach. But God uses a variety of individuals. And we're thankful for that. And that's really what I learned, one of the things I learned from church history. All right, tonight we start on the early American church history. And we really can't do that without, first of all, talking about the revivals that were in both America and Europe. You really can't do one without the other. Now, the reason for that is because these evangelists traveled back and forth across the Atlantic. D.L. Moody did not just stick to the United States. And most of these men would go back and forth. Wesley, Whitefield, on and on. They kept going back and forth. So if we're going to talk about simply American evangelism or American revivals, we really cannot do it justice unless we talk about the European revivals as well. The Second Great Awakening from 1790 to 1840 was known for fervent preaching, camp meetings, and reached its peak somewhere around 1820 to 1830. There were emotional and popular appeals, no doubt about it. You say, that's not my style, that's not the way, that's fine. I'm just telling you, here's what they did. Very emotional and very popular appeals. Revival meetings were more often, or more considered more than just religious events. They were actually spectacles. In fact, an Irish laborer said this that I've included in the notes: a revival meeting is as good as a theater. So people would come sometimes just out of curiosity. But again, you have to think of the time in which this is happening. I mean, Billy Sunday, for his time, probably met a need that no one else could have met. Remember, he's living and preaching during the time of Houdini. So you're trying to compete with the guy who's jumping into rivers, fully shackled in chains, without any keys, allegedly, or being locked upside down in a water torture chamber. And so you're trying to compete for people's attention. So if that's the day in which you're living, you can kind of see where, unless you do something pretty unusual, pretty spectacular, you may not get the attention of individuals. Number three, we see during this time there was the transformation of denominations. There were growth in Methodist, Baptist, and Presbyterian churches. By 1850, Methodism was considered the largest American denomination, with Baptists narrowing the gap. Number four, there was a revival in Burned Over District of New York. Now, what does that mean? Well, that was a phrase coined by Charles Finley. It's actually talking not about New York City, but it's talking about Western and Central New York. He said that there were so many revivals going on that it was hard to find a sinner. Well, I guess he needs to go back to Buffalo now and find out what's there. He's the one who said there are no more souls to awaken at that time. There was renewal in England and America, both with Wesley and Whitefield earlier, and then later on. Now, also during the time of this New York burned over district, of course, that's when so many of the cults came up. So it looks like everybody's trying to get in on the action. These different groups say, wow, if this is that popular, and if people are following this kind of a crowd, let's come up with a new idea. And so Mormonism and the Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses, all of them are coming up at this very same time when all this emotional fervor was at its peak. The picture of England after Wesley, I've got a quote here: hot, tired, thirsty, impatient. The English nobleman asked a peasant, Why is it that I can't find a place where I can buy a drink of liquor in this wretched village?" The humble peasant respectfully replied, "Well, you see, my lord, a few years ago a man named John Wesley came preaching in these parts." Of course, that's what these revivals were known for, the transformation, not just of the individual, but the transformation of the workplace, the transformation of the churches, and the transformation of the culture, all occurring during these revivals in early America. Number 6, we have D.L. Moody's English and American crusades. He first had his crusade in England, and then after 3 years, came to America and continued his crusades on this continent. 1873 to 1875, and I'm going pretty quick tonight. I want to cover as much as I can. He engaged in a series of meetings that shook that conservative nation as nothing he had done since the time of Whitefield and the Wesleys. Moody later credited a bedridden woman's months of prayer for the outpouring that followed. And again, that was in Great Britain. That was the English revival. Then he came to America, and it continues. In fact, one book I read said that while he was on board ship coming from England to America, he received about a half a dozen cables from cities, churches, government, wanting him to come and start a crusade in that particular city. He first went to Brooklyn. Wasn't much of a success. They weren't quite ready for him, I guess, or maybe not organized enough. Next, he went to Philadelphia. According to some of the statistics, in 2 months, they saw over 700,000 in attendance with 4,000 converts. What I find interesting is what was told in the New York Daily Graphic, April 25th of 1875. The meetings were a marked improvement on all previous great revivals in important particulars. They were well managed. The order was perfect. The preaching was unlike that of previous revivalists in the fact that it was not exciting. It awoke no feelings of terror. It produced no spasms and agonies and convulsions. It sent nobody to the madhouse. It was pervaded with an undertone of sympathy and hope and love. Whatever may be thought of Mr. Moody's doctrines, it must be conceded that he made a new departure, revivalism. So maybe you say, well, that's my kind of guy. The Billy Sunday type, I just don't know if I could handle that kind of, okay, well, maybe you're a more of a D.L. Moody type person. And I'm saying this again to remind us, aren't you glad that God can use such a variety of men and women? I mean, it would be very boring if we were all identical to me or to you or to whoever. And so God can use a Billy Sunday, but God can use a D.L. Moody. Next week, we'll look at some of those that stood for defending the gospel against evolution, against the German higher critics. This one's kind of about the emotionalism of the early American revivals. Next week, we'll look at more of those, the scholars, like the C.S. Lewis and so on, who helped defend our faith against the attacks coming at it from all directions. D.L. Moody founded 2 notable schools in New England: Northfield Seminary for young women, later renamed Northfield School for Girls in 1879, and Mount Hermon School for Boys in 1881, both located in Northfield, Massachusetts. That was where D.L. Moody was born. These 2 institutions are collectively known as the Northfield Schools and eventually merged to form today's Northfield Mount Hermon School. Got a call on Saturday from a guy named Charlie. I met Charlie up in Hartford, Connecticut. His job until he retired recently was to be a chauffeur and drive all these famous people around Boston and Connecticut and whatever. So anytime I'd go and speak in that church, he was the chauffeur by default, because he knew where he was going, to take us all around. So we went to, for example, the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame, and I don't know how many times he had taken guest speakers there, but he was acting like it was the first time. And then he drove us onto the campuses of the Northfield Schools, started by D.L. Moody. I don't know, again, how many times he's done this, but he stops the car as he sees a couple students walking by. He rolls down his window, I guess electric, he puts the window down and asks them to come over, and he asks a couple of things about directions. And then he asks them this question: hey, who's D.L. Moody? You know, the old deer in headlights look? Absolutely nothing. Here are these young people in these preparatory schools who have no clue about the individual who founded and started these institutions over 100 years ago. Pretty sad. Moody, of course, also founded Moody Bible Institute in Chicago in 1886. They've made the news just recently because the Chicago public schools are refusing to let their students do their internship, teacher, whatever they call, student teaching, whatever they want to call it. And so they're now taking that to court, but that's Moody Bible Institute. One of their greatest works was during the Columbia expedition in 1893 in Chicago. I remember reading a book about that exposition. That was kind of cool. Besides a serial killer that was loose there that had a hotel, besides the point for that guy, it was the first Ferris wheel ever been built. And when you read about this thing, you said, who would dare have enough courage to get into it? Big old cars, no place to sit. You could pack 60 people into them, standing shoulder to shoulder like this as you go up several hundred feet in the air. Not me. But that was the exposition. But the Moody students were able to evangelize during that famous event in American history. Moody Aviation has played a significant and unique role in the history of Moody Bible Institute by serving as its missionary aviation training program. Established in 1946, Moody Aviation was created to train pilots, mechanics, and avionics technicians, especially for missionary and humanitarian work in remote areas around the world. And you can read about that. Another revival that I think is quite interesting, for number 7, is the Welsh revival in the country of Wales. I remember hearing a speaker who actually remembers a part of that. He was old enough to remember a father or grandfather that had lived through that. Evan Roberts was the brains and the personality behind that great revival. First time they had a meeting, only 16 people attended. He had 4 points, that is Evan Roberts, that he repeated over and over again in all of his messages. They were these: confess your sin, avoid doubtful habits, obey the Holy Spirit, and confess your sin publicly. There were 24-hour chapels going on every day for prayer. They became the norm during the Welsh revival. Their unconventional meetings with spontaneous prayer, hymn singing, and testimonies. They often lasted into early morning hours. Estimates are that 150,000 were converted in just 6 months. Now, this is a coal mining area. The country of Wales is kind of like comparable to West Virginia. A lot of coal miners back in those days, early 1900s. And I wanted to make sure this is documented. I believe it is, so I enjoy the story. It goes like this. When you have all these coal carts filled with coal, and, this is, again, back before what we're used to, electricity. I mean, they're just coming into its own. In fact, that Columbia expedition, 1893, first time they used electric lights to light up the evening of the whatever. But anyway, they got to get this coal from these carts out of the underground mines. So they got these ponies, they call them pit ponies, that would pull these wagons full of coal and pull them out of the caves or wherever the coal's coming from. But during the time of the Welsh revival, it appears that the ponies pretty much gave up working. Now, it's not that they were revived. It's the fact that they can no longer understand the commands of their masters because they stopped using profanity. And these poor ponies are thinking, what? What are you talking about? Well, I guess that really is revival. If you can change the conversation completely of these rugged individuals during the time of the revival. There was an increased demand for Bibles. Temperance, crime rates declined. Schools and businesses altered their schedules. Bridged denominational divides, improved productivity in businesses. So then there's revival meetings in Wales, crossed the Atlantic and swept through the American churches. In Philadelphia alone, 6,101 converts by number came to the Lord. Denver closed businesses and schools for community prayer days. Something else was known by these early revivals: social and moral reform. Burlington, Iowa, for example, saw every store and factory close for prayer meetings. Number 9, revival as renewal. We have to admit, and I think the revivalists started to see this, there's this pattern that's coming over and over again. It's the pattern of decline and renewal. Decline and renewal. Which brings up an interesting question. Was all worth it? If we're all on this roller coaster where people get excited for the Lord and all these people come to the Lord and then they're pretty much back where they were perhaps just a few months or a few years later. Churches saw it, people saw it, individuals, the civic organization saw it. You know, what do we think of all that? Well, it is a part and parcel of life, and we see it in Scripture. The book of Judges is pretty much, that's the theme of the book of Judges. You know, people get away from the Lord, then they get revived, then they come back. There's always a remnant. Then they get away from the Lord, then they come back, but there's always a remnant. On and on, we see this cycle. We see Elijah get up on the mountain, literally on a mountaintop experience, calling fire down from heaven. And then in just a few days, he's got the Jezebel jitters, and he's running for his life from this woman Jezebel, sitting down under a tree and asking God to kill him. Elijah, why didn't you just stay where you were? She would have been glad to take care of that for you. And we see with John the Baptist. On one occasion, John the Baptist says, "Behold the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world." And then a few days later, "Are you the one we're looking for, or do we seek another?" And I'm sure all of us in our lives experience these highs and lows. It is a part of the Christian life. Our prayer is, at least for myself, and I hope for you when you go through these, is that when you come down to a lower level, it's never quite what it was before. That the trajectory is at least in an upward slant. There's no such thing, as far as I can tell, in the Christian life of a linear growth with the Lord. Now, that would be perfect. I wish it were true. I wish it for my own life. But I'll be on a mountaintop. In fact, with the story of Elijah, it reminds me that sometimes when we're at the height of our spiritual position is when we're the most susceptible to times of digression, discouragement, depression. And the Lord has to come alongside just one more time, again and again and again, and bring us back. So I think they begin to see that there's got to be something more. And that's going to, just a few minutes, bring us back to something that D.L. Moody did to realize, this idea of the revivals back and forth and up and down, there's got to be something more. We've got to provide for the Christian community something more than just a spontaneous revival meeting that comes and goes. Let's look at the missions during this time. We now have during the early American history, we have the beginning of worldwide missions, which is ironic when you think it took this long for missions really to catch on. I mean, how was the gospel spread? I mean, we're talking 1,700 years after Christ was on earth, and we look at the book of Acts. But once you get past the book of Acts, it's hard to find a lot of mission activity. Now, there were those. We didn't spend the time to go through each and every one. But it's really not until we get into 1792 that we see William Carey, the father of modern missions. What were they doing all these years? How was the gospel spread for something like 1,500 years? As far as I can find, the best answer is one word: gossip. Now, maybe that's the wrong word, but I think you know what I mean. It basically is sharing word of mouth with your neighbors. That's how the gospel was spread, and I think it's hard to improve upon that. You can call it friendship, evangelism, whatever you want. But the fact that the best tool to reach the lost is simply one-on-one, an individual who knows the Lord sharing the gospel. That's what was done for almost 1,500 years. But modern missions. William Carey. What I find about these missionaries is something I find intriguing, is the fact that each one of the ones I've got here in my list started out to head in one direction, to go to one mission field, and God said, no, you're going to go over here. And of course, we have that pattern as well in Acts chapter 16. when the Holy Spirit says, no, I don't want you to go into Asia Minor, I don't want you to go into Bithynia or Mysia, I want you to go over into Europe. And so we find that pattern in the scriptures, but we also find it so much with these early missionaries. William Carey had read a book by Captain Cook. That's Captain Cook, not Captain Hook. Captain Cook, about the South Sea Islands, the Polynesian Islands. And that's where his goal was. That was his desire. But the Holy Spirit said no. And he ends up in India in 1793. He, along with his co-workers, completed a translation of the Bible into 6 different Indian languages. 29 partially translated scriptures into 29 other dialects or languages. At the time that he finished the translation, it represented 1/6 of the world's population. At the time that William Carey finished, 1/6 of the world had scripture in their language. Unbelievable what he did in the time that he had. Number 2, Adoniram Judson. His goal was to go to India, but the War of 1812 was raging. The British rule there was hostile to the American missionary. So instead of going to India, he went to Burma. He was there 6 years before he saw his first convert. And yet at the end of his ministry, we believe that he was responsible for encouraging 150 missionaries to go out, establish 60 churches, and 7,000 converts. 1812, he married Maria. They were separated, rejoined. Maria dies. He marries Sarah in 1834. She dies 2 years later. He marries Emily, who's the 29-year-old that Adoniram had asked to write his previous wife's biography. Strange, but that's... So ladies, be careful who you let write your husband's biography. All right, number 3, David Livingstone. His goal was China in 1841, but the Opium Wars were raging, and so that was off the record. Instead, he goes to South Africa. He married Mary, so they were separated in 1852, rejoined in 1859. She died 3 months after they were reunited. On April 29th of 1873, he was found dead on his knees beside his bed. His heart was buried in Africa, his body in Westminster Abbey in London, England. You know, the idea of a man leaving his wife or his wife leaving, that seems, again, very strange to us. I don't know if they took those verses, if you love your father, mother, sister, brother, you can't. I don't know if they took that so literally or what. But if you read, and I would recommend you read some of these biographies and see what made these people tick and why were they what they were. Just highly recommend it. Any chance you can get to read missionary biographies. C.T. Studd, I did not mention him in the listing, but he was separated for 15 years from his wife because she was seriously ill. You know, he's the one, only one life will soon be past, only what's done for Christ will last. And yet 15 years away from her, while she's back in England recuperating from a very serious illness. Number 4, Hudson Taylor. His goal was to go to China, particularly Shanghai, which is on the coast. And by the way, most modern missions dealt with being on the coast. It was easy to take your ships and travel there, get back to where your homeland was, whatever. So to go into the interior at the time of Hudson Taylor was extremely rare. However, he was so disliked, and even other missionaries were so critical of him, especially when he dressed like one of the Chinese and wore his hair that way and learned their language and learned their science and so on. People just thought that's just weird. And yet it seems to be the thing that really helped him reach the Chinese people. And so that's Hudson Taylor. Instead of staying at the port city, he went into the interior of China. That's important because he's the one that founded China Inland Mission. Perhaps missionaries would have never gone into the interior unless it was for someone like a Hudson Taylor. Number 5, William Borden. I like to mention him primarily because he only lived to be 25. And he never really accomplished that much. at least in the eyes of man. But I see that in our family. When my brother died at age 43, people ask that question, he died so soon, or why did God take him at that? Well, he never had a chance to do much for the Lord, and so on. And so I like to be reminded of somebody like a William Borden, who never lived this long on the earth. And yet, at his death, he influenced literally thousands of students to give their life to missions. So the Lord knows what he's doing. His ways are not our ways, and his thoughts are not our thoughts. But William Borden grew up at the Moody Church in Chicago under the ministry of R.A. Torrey. He dedicated his life when he was 7 years of age. According to the biography, he had a little sailor outfit on when he went forward at Moody Church. Nobody could see him. After all, he's 7 years of age. Everybody's standing. They can't even see the kid. So R.A. Torrey took him up in his arms, held him up high, and says, this little boy wants to give his life to missions. And I think it wasn't necessarily a joke, but I'm thinking people thought it's kind of cute. And probably didn't give it much thought. But what he did that day at age 7 was something he carried with him the rest of his life. He went to Yale 1905 to 1909, Princeton from 1909 to 1912. Yes, he is an extended member of the Borden Milk family, not the direct lineage, but he's one of those cousins or nephews or something. So he did inherit a portion of the milk company's money. He's wealthy. He had everything going for him. And he gave it all up to go work with the Chinese Muslims. That would require him to learn two of the most difficult languages in all the world, Arabic and Chinese. And even though he had all this money, when he was a student at Yale and at Princeton, he never owned a car. Now again, think of the early 1900s cars. Really cool. He could have owned 100 of them. He never owned one. He said, everything I have belongs to God. His classmates said, you're stupid. You're an idiot. What's going on? You get all the cars you want. And all the girls because of all the cars you want. And what are you doing? He says, the money's not mine. It belongs to the Lord. His ordination was September 5th of 1912. He went to Cairo, Egypt to learn the first of those two languages, Arabic. But at age 25, he developed cerebrospinal meningitis. His mother and sister on board a ship on the way to Cairo to surprise him, they got the word that he was deathly ill. They got there as soon as they could. They got there in an afternoon. But William Borden had gone to be with the Lord that morning. He was still lying in the bed because of the contagious nature of the disease. Nobody was going in. And so all the mother and sister could do would be stand in the doorway, see William Borden on that bed, and then eventually they had the funeral for him right there in Cairo. They sang the song, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, and sing it softly through the gloom, where the heart for mercy craves, sing in triumph o'er the tomb, Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Those songs were sung at his funeral. His will is something else. I've included a part of that here. The will of William Borden, 1913, $250,000 to China Inland Mission, $100,000 each to Moody Bible Institute, National Bible Church, and the Chicago Avenue Church. $50,000 each to several other mission boards. Mrs. Howard Taylor is the one that wrote his biography, and he described William Borden's life. Apart from Christ, there is no explanation for such a life. This phrase is directly associated with William Borden's legacy and is inscribed on his tombstone in Cairo, Egypt. Mrs. Taylor goes on to say this: the length of time God permits us to stay here is not related to a certain amount of work he wants us to do, so much as to a certain closeness of relationship to himself he wants us to attain. I guess one of my favorite illustrations is this next part. William Borden wrote no reserves after deciding to give up his family fortune to pursue missions, no retreats after leaving for the mission field, and no regrets in Egypt as he was facing terminal illness before his death. These lines were discovered in his Bible after his passing. The first two were written at decisive moments in his life, and the third was penned during his final days in Egypt, while preparing for missionary work among Muslims in China. No reserve, no retreat, no regrets. I like that, and I've also written that in my Bible, and I'd recommend it to you as well. No reserve, no retreat, no regrets. Why does God take a William Borden at age 25, or a David Brainerd at age 29, or a Robert Murray McShane before he reached 30, or a Jim Elliot at age 29? Why? Because God knows what he's doing. And oftentimes, these are the events in church history that inspire others to take up the torch, to take up the baton, and continue the work that was begun by them. Capital C, worldwide ministers and ministries. We kind of talked about D.L. Moody, but just kind of a quick review. Number one, D.L. Moody, Northfield, Massachusetts. The turning point in Moody's life was simple, swift, and direct. He was wrapping up a package of shoes. His Sunday school teacher at the Mount Vernon Street Congregational Church, Edward Kimball, dropped in on him and in a few earnest words urged him to give his allegiance to Jesus Christ. Moody paused, the string taut in his fingers. "I will," he replied, and for 45 years, from that day in 1856 to his death on December 22nd, 1899, he never swerved from that pledge of fidelity. Number two, Charles Spurgeon. Again, how do you talk about these people? I'm giving you just a snippet of information, maybe something that you read over the next few minutes that might encourage you. I understand at least something, but some books are available in your library. Is that correct? Just so I don't take the ones from the couple shelves, because I already took one. Is that okay? If not, see me afterwards. The Journals of Jim Elliot. I want to read more about him. So I'm ready to go with that. So if that's okay, I appreciate that. Try to make sure I don't steal anything. All right. Spurgeon, called the Prince of Preachers, a voracious reader. Some claim he had a photographic memory, that he could remember by name every one of the 2,000 members of his church at its height. That's not bad, if he could do that. He was a little bit different during the days of dry pulpit discourse. Somehow he connected with people. He wrote a magazine called The Sword and the Trowel, and his Treasury of David, 7 volumes on the book of Psalms. Fantastic. I'd recommend it to you as well. D.L. Moody was asked if he had ever heard Spurgeon. He said, yes, but better still, I heard him pray. Everybody uses Spurgeon as far as Calvinism, Arminianism, and Baptists and Presbyterians. I like the balance that he keeps on God's sovereignty. We'll talk just a little bit about this next week. We can't spend a lot of time. But brethren, he said, be willing to see both sides of the shield of truth. Rise above the babyhood, which cannot believe 2 doctrines until it sees the connecting link. Have you not 2 eyes, man? Must you needs put one of them out to see clearly? C.I. Scofield. I've got a Scofield Bible. I'm used to it. I can't go a different direction. Why? Because I know where things are on the page. You know that. If you got your favorite Bible, okay, I can't remember the chapter and verse, but I know it's in the right-hand page and about 5 lines down from the right-hand column, and I just keep looking for that, right? I mean, of course, now you get your phone out and do a search. You're good to go. But back in the old days, I just kept with the Scofield Bible. I like it. Do I agree with everything? Of course not. None of us would about every little thing. But it's been very helpful. I enjoy the notes, and I can find things in my Bible. If I ever misplaced my Bible, like I did one time, I put my Bible down. I was getting ready to preach. I couldn't find where I put it down. I had to grab whatever I had. It took me forever to get through that message. I said, folks, whoever out there took my Bible, please return it or we'll be here all night because I can't find things. All right, C.I. Scofield. R.A. Torrey, an American evangelist, pastor, educator, and author. He was the superintendent of Chicago Bible Institute, which is now Moody Bible Institute. Editor of The Fundamentals, which has helped many separate what are truly the fundamentals of the faith from the things of simply preference, someone's idea. It is good for us to be able to know the difference between the essentials and the non-essentials. G. Campbell Morgan, a British evangelist, preacher, author, and Bible teacher, renowned for his expository preaching and numerous biblical commentaries. His works include The Crisis of the Christ and studies on every book of the Bible. Well, I did want to get to Billy Sunday. I brought my display. It was back in, I guess, now don't tell me you weren't born yet. I know. Every time I throw out dates, people look at me like, how old are you? Just forget it. But anyway, around 1980, 81, I simply asked a question. Are there baseball cards of Billy Sunday? And I guess I wasn't the only one, because over the years from about 1975 to 1993, I would bring some of these baseball cards that you can see. I brought them to my classes. And of course, I had to watch these students. You can't trust them. Make sure they're not making off with them. But anyway, evidently they must have enjoyed that, because I got this letter a few years after. Greetings, Dan Shaver, one of our seminary students, accompanied us on a tour of the Billy Sunday home, which is located in Winona Lake. In the course of the conversation at the home, Dan mentioned that there was a Billy Sunday baseball card. Dan indicated that you were knowledgeable in the field of baseball cards. Our questions are these. Now, this is coming from Winona Lake. This is where the museum, the Billy Sunday home is, the archive, and they have everything there is to know about Billy Sunday, except they had no clue. Question number 1, are there, in fact, baseball cards of Sunday? Number 2, if there are cards, where does one go to purchase these? Good luck. And 3, what would an archive expect to pay for such a card? And I responded to that letter, and they appreciated my response. I think they probably wanted some donations. I mean, I guess every archive wants that. I get that. I understand it. Most archives don't have unlimited funds to buy things. But anyway, I found out pretty quickly, yes, indeed, Billy Sunday does have baseball cards. Produced by Old Judge. And yes, you're going to see it's Old Judge cigarettes. And no, I didn't buy packs of cigarettes to buy them, to get these cards. The cigarettes are long gone, but they did not come with bubble gum. Not back in the 1880s. But from 1883 to 1890, Billy Sunday played baseball. First for the Chicago White Stockings, then for Pittsburgh Alleghenies, and finally ended his career in Philadelphia. That's where a lot of people end their career, amen. Philadelphia. In his biography, written by William Ellis, interesting, Cap Anson was the manager of the Chicago White Stockings. And he shows up in the little town of Ames, Iowa, and he sees Billy Sunday playing baseball. Now, Billy was an average player, but there's one thing he was good at. He was fast. In fact, on page 34 of the biography, it says it's the first time anyone has ever been timed running the bases in 14 seconds. Now, obviously, when you're running bases, you have to make 3 left-hand turns, kind of make it more of a, so it's not a straight line. So if you're starting to do the math there, well, how fast is that? I'm glad you asked how fast that is. You've always wanted to use your phone, right? Go ahead and grab it if you know how to Google something or find something. I want you to plug in this. PCA. That's not Pensacola Christian Academy. PCA is Pete Crow Armstrong. Plug in PCA and then put in 14 seconds. PCA 14 seconds. One of the first things that pops up should be Major League Baseball.
This is inside the park.
Inside Park home run 1 year ago, August 23rd of 2024. He ran the bases in 14.08 seconds.
I've watched this too many times.
Why don't you bring it up for us while you're at it? Can you do it? I'll keep talking. You get ready to, and they're going to have to look at their little screen, but I'd rather you do it than me. It's interesting to hear the commentary, too, if you got the Major League Baseball. Now, you have to watch 15-second commercial probably before you get to it, but eventually you can. Probably it's only when you hit an inside the park home run that you're running that fast.
He lost his helmet.
Yeah, he did. He lost his helmet. And the commentaries, man, he can fly. Yeah, he can fly. 14.08 seconds he ran on the inside the park home run. Okay, so that kind of gives me an idea. That's how fast Billy Sunday could run. So he would try to stretch a single into a double. You know, he was known as a madman on the base pass, and people loved it. Because that was, again, something kind of out of the ordinary. Not something you normally see. All right, you got to cast it up here for us? I appreciate that. We can all enjoy it.
Make it Commander Data.
I didn't think about that.
It's loading.
Now I got your attention.
3.5 seconds per base.
I think it's also appropriate that he's a fellow Cubby. You know, he said, no, wait a minute now. You said that Billy Sunday was a member of the White Stockings. That's correct. That was a National League team. So the White Stockings, there it goes.
Stretch glove of Sanchez. PCA on the move, racing towards third. Are they going to send him? Here he comes. PCA to the plate. And way inside the park home run. Heath Crow Armstrong.
All right. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. If I would have thought of that earlier, we'd have done this. All right. Anyway, I've enjoyed the study of Billy Sunday. You'll see, if you come up here in just a few minutes, you'll see pictures of him. Here's the picture with Babe Ruth. This is 1919 at the spring training of the Red Sox. Billy Sunday would go around to all these different spring trainings. Here he is. Notice every guy in here has the suit and tie on. That's just how they dressed those days. But Billy Sunday oftentimes would be asked to ump the games, the spring training games, and so he's pictured here as doing that. The ballparks looked more like this in the 19th century. The outfield fence was simply made up of all the people in the horse-drawn carriages surrounding left and center and right field. Here's an excerpt from Billy Sunday's book. I saw Charlie swing hard, heard the bat hit the ball with a terrific boom. Bennett had smashed the ball on the nose, and I saw the ball rise in the air and knew that it was going clear over my head. He's playing center field. I could judge within 10 feet of where the ball would light. I turned my back to the ball and ran. The field was crowded with people, and I yelled, "Stand back!" And that crowd opened as the Red Sea opened for the rod of Moses. I ran on, and as I ran, I made a prayer. It wasn't theological either. I tell you that. I said, God, if you ever helped mortal man, help me to get the ball, and you haven't very much time to make up your mind either. I ran and jumped over the bench and stopped. I thought I was close enough to catch it. I looked back and saw it was going over my head, and I jumped and shoved out my left hand, and the ball hit it and stuck. At the rate I was going, the momentum carried me on, and I fell under the feet of a team of horses. I jumped up with the ball in my hand. All right. So anyway, Billy Sunday, he's a fascinating character, a different individual, but I believe for the time that he lived, he was just exactly what America needed. There were at least 6 different songs that were composed about Billy Sunday. I've given you just one. Let's Stand by Billy Sunday. And so you're welcome to look at all these things up here. If you got time, like I said, I wanted to try to finish this. He's a pretty popular guy. In fact, when he shows up in New York, he's surrounded by the police department. He's arriving in New York there for a crusade. So quite the individual. Anyway, you can look at the other 2, Ironside and DeHaan, and let's call it a night.
Was his name really Sunday?
Yes, William Ashley.